You are listening to the audio production of A Habitual Sight of Him, The Christ-Centered Piety of Thomas Goodwin, by Joel R. Beeke, Mark Jones, and Thomas Goodwin, part of the Profiles in Reformed Spirituality series, published by Audiobooks. This book was originally published by Reformation Heritage and is read by Johnathan Welsh. With gratitude to Adrian and Claire Slutemaker, models of Christ-centered piety, loyal, God-fearing, enjoyable friends of 3 decades. I thank my God upon every remembrance of you. Philippians chapter 1 verse 3. J.R.B. To my beloved friends at Faith Vancouver PCA, may these readings do for your souls what they have done for my own, that in all things he might have the preeminence. Colossians chapter 1 verse 18. M.J. The indwelling of Christ by faith is to have Jesus Christ continually in one's eye, a habitual sight of him. I call it so because a man actually does not always think of Christ, but as a man does not look up to the sun continually, yet he sees the light of it. So you should carry along and bear along in your eye the sight and knowledge of Christ, so that at least a presence of him accompanies you, which faith makes. Thomas Goodwin, Works, chapter 2, page 411. The Piety of Thomas Goodwin, 1600 to 1680. Considering Thomas Goodwin's theological and political influence in 17th century England, it is remarkable that he is little known today, even within conservative Reformed evangelical circles. The reasons for Goodwin's relative obscurity today are several. For example, Goodwin was a Puritan and champion of ecclesiastical independency, that is, congregationalism. Therefore, as a result of the political and religious upheaval in England during the 1640s and 1650s, culminating in the Great Ejection of 1662, Goodwin found himself on the, quote, losing side, end quote. And, as Carl Trueman has noted, quote, nonconformists were not simply expelled from the Church of England, but excluded from the establishment, political, cultural, and intellectual, with all of the later impotence with regard to influence and the writing of history which that implies, end quote. Furthermore, in connection to the Great Ejection, the paucity of secondary literature on Goodwin can be explained in part because of the Anglican monopoly of higher education that has continued into the 20th century. The Puritans, especially Goodwin, quote, suffered the neglect which their separation from the Church made inevitable, end quote. The legacy of Goodwin, or lack thereof, is not then the result of any intrinsic mediocrity in his thought, but rather the result of disadvantageous historical circumstances that relegated one of England's finest theologians to the halls of obscurity. Those, however, who have read Goodwin are capacious in their praise. Renowned for intelligent piety at its Puritan best, Goodwin, known as, quote, the Atlas of Independency, end quote, stands on a par with John Owen, quote, the Prince of Puritans, end quote, as a theologian and an exegete, and often surpasses him in experimental depth. Any lover of the biblical and experimental emphases of the Puritans will find Goodwin both readable and spiritually rewarding. He represents the cream of Puritanism, capturing the intellect, will, and heart of his readers. His collected works join the vigour of earlier Puritans such as William Perkins and Richard Sibbes to the matured thought of later Puritan divines, represented supremely by Owen. Those influenced by Goodwin's writings include John Cotton, Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, and John Gill. Alexander White confessed, quote, I have read no other author so much and so often, and I continue to read him to this day as if I had never read him before, end quote. He calls Goodwin's sermon, quote, Christ dwelling in our hearts by faith, end quote.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?